The Lonely Giant. The sun hung low over the sprawling expanse of the Thornton Ranch, painting the fields in shades of amber and gold. Jake Thornton, a towering figure of a man, moved deliberately across the property, each step sinking slightly into the soft earth. His hands, calloused from decades of labor, lifted hay bales with ease, yet there was a hollow weight to his movements, a silent echo of years spent in solitude. The ranch had once been a lively place, full of laughter and warmth, but betrayal had carved a quiet, isolated life into Jake's routine. He paused at the edge of the pasture, surveying the cattle grazing peacefully. The rhythmic lowing and rustle of the wind through the tall grass were the only sounds accompanying his thoughts. No one had crossed the threshold of this property for years. No neighbor, no friend, certainly no companion who might understand the complexities of a man who had loved and lost too deeply. He had built walls, not just of timber and stone, but of caution and mistrust, and in that solitude, he had learned to rely only on himself. Yet today was different. A distant rumble of a truck broke the familiar silence, carrying with it the faint melody of laughter. Jake's brow furrowed as he squinted toward the driveway. 5 figures emerged, moving with the coordinated energy of a group who knew one another well. Women, each distinct, yet all carrying a confident air of purpose. They were here to work, hired to help maintain the sprawling ranch, but their arrival stirred something unfamiliar within him. Curiosity, anticipation, a pulse of longing he had buried deep. The first to step down from the truck was Maya, her bright eyes scanning the land with a keen curiosity. There was a playful spark in the way she moved, a subtle confidence that seemed to challenge the very order of the quiet ranch. Behind her, Lila carried herself with a calm, nurturing presence, adjusting the straps of her bag as if ready to handle any challenge. Sienna, the third, walked with a certain fluidity, a mischievous tilt in her posture, suggesting she might test boundaries and provoke reactions. Harper followed, practical and grounded, already observing Jake's routines with an analytical eye, taking mental notes. And last was Nina, quiet and reserved, a woman whose gaze lingered longer than necessary, noting details others might overlook. Jake stepped forward as the women approached, his large frame imposing yet awkward in social encounters. "Welcome to the ranch," he said, his voice low but steady. The women returned smiles, each different, yet all radiating a warmth that seemed almost foreign to him. There was an unspoken energy in the air, a tension that neither words nor gestures fully explained. He found himself measuring their presence, aware of the subtle sway of hips, the lift of a brow, the warmth in eyes that lingered just a heartbeat too long. Their introductions were brief, professional. Tasks were assigned, and Jake watched as the women dispersed across the ranch, their movements efficient but oddly graceful. Maya organized the supplies, occasionally teasing Sienna about her clumsy handling of boxes. Lila moved to check on the barn animals, her hands gentle as she adjusted the feed. Harper followed Jake to inspect the fences, asking questions that revealed an intelligence that was both practical and intuitive. Nina observed silently, noting Jake's every gesture, while Sienna found a way to linger close, her playful energy brushing against the edges of his disciplined solitude. As the day wore on, Jake felt a mixture of unease and fascination. He was unaccustomed to attention, unprepared for the nuanced ways in which each woman seemed to weave herself into the rhythm of the ranch. Simple gestures, hands brushing, a shared laugh, an unexpected smile, stirred something long dormant. He reminded himself to remain vigilant, yet part of him wondered whether the walls he had so carefully built could withstand this sudden intrusion of life, laughter, and a subtle seduction. By evening, the sun had dipped beneath the horizon, leaving the ranch bathed in soft twilight. The women gathered around a fire they had built near the farmhouse, cooking a modest meal and sharing stories in the flickering light. Jake observed, silent yet present, noting how their interactions revealed distinct personalities, desires, and perhaps hidden intentions. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold weight he had carried alone for so long. For the first time in years, Jake felt the stirrings of something dangerous yet intoxicating: desire, curiosity, and the undeniable pull of human connection. The 5 women had arrived to assist with the ranch, yet they had also awakened a tension, a promise of conflict, and a temptation he was not sure he could resist. As he watched them laugh and move among each other, he realized that life on the ranch was about to change, and he could no longer control the currents of attraction that now circled him. With night fully settled over the land, Jake returned to the farmhouse, lingering at the doorway for a moment to glance at the firelight dancing across the faces of the women. The ranch, once silent and empty, now thrummed with unseen energy. The journey from solitude to something more, something dangerous, intoxicating, had begun. And Jake knew, deep down, that his carefully constructed walls were facing their first real test. Unspoken desires. The morning light filtered softly through the farmhouse windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen where the aroma of fresh bread and brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of hay from a barn. Jake entered, still heavy with the lingering unease of yesterday's first encounters. The women were already at work, Maya chopping vegetables with precise efficiency, Lila arranging the pantry with careful attention, Sienna humming as she polished the wooden countertops, Harper checking inventory lists, and Nina quietly observing the rhythm of the household. Each movement was purposeful, yet each carried a subtle undertone that drew Jake's attention more than he wanted to admit. Jake set down his coffee mug, running a hand through his thick hair. He felt the weight of their presence more acutely than ever. Their laughter, casual conversation, and gentle teasing created a texture to the morning that both unsettled and intrigued him. He told himself it was professional. They were here to work. Yet the way Maya's eyes lingered just a fraction too long, the softness of Lila's smile, Sienna's playful lean toward him, these gestures ignited attention Jake could not ignore. By mid-morning, Jake had assigned tasks across the ranch. The women dispersed, each handling chores with efficiency and flair, but their interactions with him were far from routine. Maya found reasons to cross paths, handing him tools with a lingering touch or an intentional brush of fingers. Lila asked for guidance in feeding the younger calves, her hands briefly touching his as they lifted buckets together. Sienna's teasing became more pointed, her laughter melodic yet provocative, while Harper's quiet admiration spoke volumes in her attentive gaze. Nina observed from a distance, subtle yet incisive, as if cataloging every flicker of desire and hesitation that passed across Jake's face. Jake felt the pull of their attention, a magnetic force he had not experienced in years. His heart raced at the smallest gestures, a hand resting momentarily on his forearm, a shared glance during a mundane task, the way they leaned in close to discuss a project. Each encounter was a small, silent invitation, a whisper of intimacy he had long denied himself. He tried to retreat inward, reminding himself of the walls he had built, yet the women seemed intent on dismantling them with every look, every laugh, every subtle act of care. By afternoon, the tension had thickened into a tangible presence across the ranch. Jake found himself alone with Sienna in the tool shed, organizing equipment for the day. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the earthy scent of wood and metal created a charged atmosphere. Sienna's playful energy brushed against his controlled composure. She leaned in, examining a set of tools, and in doing so allowed their shoulders to touch. The contact was brief but electric. Jake's chest tightened, awareness sharpening to every nuance of her movement. "You've got a knack for details," he said, trying to mask the pull in his voice. Sienna's smile, coy and teasing, lingered as she straightened, leaving a trace of warmth in the space between them. Later, Jake walked through the fields with Lila, checking fences. She asked about his past, gently probing without overt pressure. Her questions were innocent, yet layered with an understanding that made Jake uneasy and oddly vulnerable. He found himself revealing small pieces of his solitude, the regrets of missed connections, the quiet ache of loneliness. Lila listened with unwavering patience, her presence soothing yet subtly intimate. In her company, Jake felt emotions he had long suppressed, a dangerous softness that tugged at his reason and resolve. As evening approached, the women gathered once again in the farmhouse. The air buzzed with shared laughter and conversation, yet under the surface flowed an undercurrent of tension, one that Jake felt in every glance and touch. He noticed Maya's deliberate proximity as she passed by, Sienna's lingering eye contact, Harper's subtle nod of acknowledgement, Lila's gentle smiles, and Nina's quiet, observing gaze. Each acted differently, yet all seemed tuned to the same unspoken rhythm, drawing him out of isolation and into a space he both craved and feared. Jake retired to the porch as twilight settled over the ranch, his massive frame silhouetted against the fading sun. The warmth of the day's labor and the closeness of the women left him restless, his mind a swirl of desire, doubt, and longing. He recognized the danger in these growing connections, the temptation, the potential betrayal, but could not quell the magnetic pull they exerted over him. For the first time in years, he questioned his own resolve. The walls of solitude he had built now felt fragile, the control he had maintained slipping in the face of subtle seduction and emotional intimacy. The ranch, once a sanctuary from the world, had become a stage for temptation, a battleground between his desire for connection and his fear of heartbreak. As night blanketed the land, Jake remained on the porch, listening to the soft murmur of the women inside, their laughter and conversation drifting into the night. The unspoken desires, the fleeting touches, and the stolen glances had already begun to shape a new reality, one that promised both intimacy and peril. He understood, with an uneasy clarity, that nothing about his life on the ranch would remain the same. The first threads of temptation had been woven, and Jake knew that resisting, or surrendering, would be the defining struggle of the days to come. Crossing boundaries. The morning dew still clung to the grass when Jake stepped out of the farmhouse, the chill in the air a sharp contrast to the warmth lingering from the previous evening. The ranch was alive with activity, Maya arranging tools in the barn, Lila tending to the younger calves, Harper checking fence posts, Sienna humming while preparing equipment, and Nina quietly observing from the edge of the field. Each woman moved with purpose, yet each also carried an energy that tugged at the edges of Jake's resolve. Jake had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the ranch, the solitude, the comforting weight of his routine. Yet with the women present, every gesture, every glance seemed amplified. Their proximity was both practical and charged, and he found himself noticing subtleties he had long ignored. The warmth of a hand on his forearm, a brush of hair from Maya's shoulder, the quick laughter share between Sienna and Harper that hinted at private amusements. Even Nina, quiet and reserved, seemed to orchestrate moments where Jake's attention could not help but linger. By mid-morning, a task required Jake and Sienna to work in the tool shed alone. The space was confined, smelling of oil and aged wood, the faint hum of sunlight through dusty windows casting shadows across the walls. They were arranging new supplies, their hands occasionally brushing as they lifted boxes. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it carried an electric charge that neither ignored. Jake felt a tension coil in his chest, a mixture of anticipation, guilt, and desire. "You've got a careful hand," Sienna said, her tone playful but tinged with something deeper. Her gaze held his longer than necessary, a silent challenge he struggled to meet without faltering. Jake forced a chuckle, trying to maintain composure, yet his heartbeat betrayed him. He shifted a box, their shoulders brushing again, and for a brief moment, the air seemed to thrum with possibility. Later, Jake accompanied Lila to the pasture to inspect the fences. The sun had climbed higher, warming the land, and the two walked side by side, carrying supplies. Lila asked about his past, her questions gentle yet probing, drawing out fragments of a life Jake had kept locked away. He found himself confessing small regrets, moments of loneliness, and the weight of years spent in isolation. Lila listened with unwavering attention, her presence comforting yet disarming. He realized how easily he was letting down the walls he had fortified for so long. Meanwhile, Maya had taken it upon herself to assist Harper with repairing the barn roof. Their work required close coordination, hands meeting repeatedly as they lifted beams and secured nails. Jake observed briefly from below, noting how Maya's teasing remarks to Harper mirrored the subtler provocations she had used with him. He recognized the pattern now. Each woman was testing boundaries, drawing him closer, revealing desires he had not allowed himself to acknowledge. By evening, the ranch seemed to pulse with unspoken tension. The women gathered in the kitchen, preparing dinner and exchanging glances that Jake could not ignore. He found himself standing near the counter, caught between duties and distraction, aware of the brush of hands, the lingering laughter, the subtle gestures of intimacy that were growing increasingly difficult to categorize as innocent. Every interaction reminded him of how fragile his control had become, how easily desire could slip past reason. The pivotal moment came when Jake found himself alone with Nina while moving hay bales near the barn. Her silence was deliberate and her gaze steady. As they lifted the final bale together, their hands touched longer than necessary. Jake felt a jolt, the culmination of weeks of tension threading through his chest. Nina said nothing, but her steady presence, the warmth of her touch, and the quiet intensity in her eyes spoke volumes. Jake realized, with a mixture of guilt and exhilaration, that he had crossed an invisible line, a first step into a realm he had long feared but secretly craved. Later, as twilight settled over the ranch, Jake walked toward the farmhouse, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. His thoughts raced, the fleeting touches, the whispered laughter, the moments of connection that had escalated beyond mere camaraderie. He recognized the dangerous allure of intimacy, the seductive pull of desire, and the subtle web of infidelity that had been woven around him. Every glance and every gesture from the women now carried new meaning, and he understood that resisting or surrendering would demand more than mere discipline. As night fell, the lights from the farmhouse glowed warmly against the darkening landscape. Jake lingered outside for a moment, listening to the murmur of voices within, the clinking of dishes, the occasional laugh. He was both drawn in and wary, aware that the boundaries he had set were slipping with every shared glance, every fleeting touch. The women had not just entered his ranch. They had entered his life, and with them came desire, temptation, and the first real tests of loyalty, restraint, and self-control. For the first time, Jake faced this stark realization that his life of isolation was ending. The women were no longer merely helpers. They were catalysts, provoking emotions, stirring long-suppressed desires, and challenging him in ways that demanded choice. And in that charged silence of the night, he understood the truth. The ranch, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for temptation, and the first act of his surrender, or defiance, was only just beginning. Consequences and revelation. The morning sun rose over the Thornton Ranch, scattering golden light across fields that had witnessed the subtle unfolding of desires for weeks. Jake moved through the property with a restless energy, aware of the lingering tension that had settled into every corner of the ranch. The women were already active, each immersed in her assigned tasks. Yet their presence felt heavier now, layered with the unspoken intimacy and crossed boundaries of recent days. Jake's internal conflict had grown with every interaction, every fleeting touch, and every shared glance. The simplicity of his solitary life had been replaced by a complicated web of emotions he had neither anticipated nor fully understood. He observed Maya arranging tools, her playful energy now tinged with the satisfaction of knowing she had disrupted his carefully maintained composure. Lila's gentle, soothing presence carried a subtle weight, the intimacy of shared confidences now pressing against the lines Jake had drawn. Sienna moved with her usual flirtatious ease, testing his restraint, while Harper's quiet admiration felt like a steady reminder of what genuine connection could be. Nina, ever observant, remained the silent catalyst of moments that had drawn Jake further into temptation. By mid-morning, the ranch demanded urgent attention as a gate had broken in the northern pasture. Jake and the women divided the labor, but the shared effort now carried a charged undertone. Hands touched slightly longer than necessary. Shoulders brushed in ways that were no longer accidental. Jake felt the pull of desire tightening like a knot in his chest, a knot he could neither ignore nor untangle. As they worked together, brief moments of quiet allowed for unspoken acknowledgement of the tension that had grown between them. Lila paused to hand Jake a tool, their fingers lingering for a heartbeat too long. Maya's laughter as she teased Sienna carried a subtle double meaning, and Jake found himself watching, caught between amusement and awareness of the growing dynamic. Even Harper's practical observations of fence repair contained a faint undercurrent of emotional intimacy, as if every word was weighted with connection. The turning point arrived that evening, when Jake found himself alone with Maya and Nina in the barn, securing hay bales for the coming week. The fading light cast long shadows across their faces, though the faceless quality of the moment left much to the imagination. Their closeness, the shared effort, the heat of exertion, and the tension of forbidden attraction converged. For a brief instant, a brush of fingers, the accidental press of a shoulder, the shared effort in lifting a heavy bale, all became charged with unspoken desire. Jake realized with a mixture of exhilaration and guilt that boundaries had indeed been crossed. After the work was done, the women gathered in the kitchen for dinner, the atmosphere thick with subtle implications. Conversation flowed, yet beneath the casual chatter was the awareness of what had transpired. Each woman, in her own way, had engaged him emotionally, and the web of intimacy could no longer be ignored. Jake felt the weight of responsibility, guilt, and longing pressing equally on him. He understood that desire and temptation had moved from the realm of possibility into the realm of reality, and that his choices now carried consequences beyond the simple mechanics of ranch life. Night fell over the ranch, settling in deep shadows that mirrored the uncertainty in Jake's mind. He stepped onto the porch, watching the faint glow of lights from the farmhouse illuminate fleeting movements within. The laughter, conversations, and occasional silence of the women reminded him that his life had irrevocably shifted. The isolation that had once protected him now seemed a distant memory, replaced by the complexity of connection, desire, and the potential for heartbreak. In the quiet of the night, Jake reflected on the choices before him. He had allowed the women into his life, and with them, they had illuminated desires he had long suppressed. The flirtations, touches, and shared confidences had tested his restraint, and he now understood that the path forward required conscious decision: surrender to temptation, maintain control, or navigate a delicate balance between connection and isolation. For the first time in years, Jake faced the truth. He could no longer remain untouched by human desire, nor could he pretend that his solitude had shielded him from longing. The women had awakened emotions that demanded acknowledgement, and the consequences of his actions, whether guilt, fulfillment, or heartbreak, were inevitable. As he gazed across the ranch, bathed in moonlight, Jake felt the weight of both regret and exhilaration, knowing that the chapters of his life had irrevocably changed. The ranch was no longer silent. Desire, temptation, and emotional entanglement had taken root. And while the nights would be filled with uncertainty, longing, and subtle tension, Jake also recognized that life, once dull and solitary, now thrummed with energy, risk, and connection. The 5 women had arrived to assist him, but in doing so, they had reshaped the very fabric of his existence. And Jake, the giant who had once lived alone, understood that the true challenge had only just begun.